there is a day to bury good news as well as bad news. So it would seem, because, well, entirely by coincidence, Mr. Skripal has been released from hospital today. And unfortunately, all the cameras, all the news teams, all the media time was otherwise engaged, because they'd all otherwise have been there in Salisbury, wouldn't they, waiting to greet the survivor of the deadly and deadly pure nerve agent, military grade, don't you know, that should have killed everyone in the environs and ended up killing no one. The only corpses were a luxury cat and 2 guinea pigs. Now, it's a mysterious tale. Many hope that it will go away. Not while I am alive, it won't. And another man who has pursued this with the kind of forensic determination that you'd expect from a man who's a former army officer, a Scotland Yard detective, a counter-terrorism intelligence officer, an international politics graduate, a lawyer, a broadcaster, and a writer. I mean, if such a man will not pursue such a case, who will? He's Charles Shoebridge, and he joins us now. Charles, was that a good introduction?
George, it's almost as if it's something I could have written myself. I can't think where you might have read that from. But,
well, it wasn't Wikipedia, that's for sure. Because if it had been in Wikipedia, Philip Cross would have filleted it many times by now. But I'll not go down that road with you. I want to ask you about the miraculous recovery of Mr. Skripal. I mean, Yulia, as the probably accidental target, certainly secondary target, if the official narrative is correct. You could just about see, in a miracle, Yulia would survive. But for Mr. Skripal to now, this day, coincidentally, the day before the royal wedding, be walking out of Salisbury Hospital, what do you make of all that?
Well, remember, there were 3 alleged victims of this. The human victims, of course, there were as you mentioned, the 2 guinea pigs and the expensive cat that the authorities allowed to die. In other words, they didn't enter the house, despite the fact that the vet of the Skripal, of Sergei Skripal, who looked after these animals, went on record to say that he repeatedly informed the police and indeed Porton Down and the hospital about these pets, but they were left to die.
Must be an offence. I mean, you're a former detective. Isn't there a criminal offence in there somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there's an offence of cruelty and neglect. That's something the RSPCA would look into. And I know, even because I pointed this out on Twitter, and a number of people, I think a couple of people then followed that up, people who saw my tweet and no doubt other people's tweets, and actually got in touch with the RSPCA and actually saw the RSPCA response, which was that, bearing in mind that the authorities weren't able to get access into the house, they claimed, therefore, there was no option but to leave them to their own devices. Notwithstanding that we all saw for many days that there were police officers standing without any protective equipment and so on, right by the very front door. That is now, we are told by the police, the epicenter, if you like, of this poisoning attempt. In other words, this smearing of this Novichok, apparently in liquid form, gel form, on the front door handle, which is where presumably Mr. and Miss Skripal were then contaminated from. But in respect of the 3 human victims, of course, there were the 2 of them, and then the police officer, one of those who was the first to attend the scene. And as you correctly say, all 3 of them have survived. We know that Julia Skripal and the police officer have spoken publicly, at least in Julia's case, that's to say 1 phone call that she was allowed to have, it seems, with her cousin in Russia. We know because that call was recorded, and immediately after that call being released by Russian media to the public, then prompted the police to make pretty much their only statement about this case, which was to confirm that Yulia would then be released from hospital. So we know that actually at least 2 of those cases, not only did they survive this attack, but also they survived seemingly with little, certainly short to medium term harm. None of the effects that we would have expected to have seen from what was described by the government and by security sources in its leaks and briefings to the media on this subject, a nerve agent that was supposedly several orders of magnitude more powerful than VX, which is the British invented nerve agent, that itself is well known that should be able to kill somebody within minutes and with the tiniest drop of material on the skin or inhaled. And so, yes, this mystery, I'm glad to hear you were saying it's not going away, and you're absolutely right, because the mainstream media would prefer it to go away without any doubt whatsoever. We already know that a D notice, that's to say, it's got a new name now, but a D notice where an intelligence committee can strongly advise the media not to publish certain details of cases. People think in this country that we have a completely free press, of course, and in theory we do, but first of all, on the one hand, the media doesn't take advantage of that freedom that they do have, of course, to pursue cases that perhaps would be embarrassing or inconvenient for the powers that be. But secondly, on some occasions, these D-notices can be issued. And a D-notice was issued in this case to prevent specifically, we know that because a journalist did leak it, that the media was asked, pretty much prevented from naming the MI6 officer who was the handler for Sergei Skripal, even as he currently stands now. And he lives close by in Salisbury, and he has been widely named on social media. But that doesn't prevent the media from actually asking the kind of questions that you're asking here and other people are asking, and I've been asking, as to what the answers are as to the many, many weaknesses in the British government's case here, in its claims that A, this material was used against the Skripals, and B, that Russia was to blame for this. There are many inconsistencies in the government's claim. There are many mysterious circumstances which are not being answered or even addressed or even questioned by the mainstream media in this country, such as how can it be that two members of the public, one of whom is a Russian citizen, one of whom is a joint British-Russian citizen, can effectively be disappeared? They are alleged to have been poisoned with this material, notwithstanding that you would expect them to have died as a result of this, that they were then used as a basis for a very persistent and very concentrated attack on Russia that resulted in many of Britain's European allies withdrawing diplomats and created what undoubtedly was a diplomatic crisis. And then it just simply disappears. And that those two people, perhaps it's too early to say in Sergei's case, but certainly Yulia has been released for many weeks now from hospital, and yet not even her relatives, not the media, not as far as we know any lawyers, nobody has had any contact with this person who is a Russian citizen. And certainly the Russian authorities here have repeatedly asked to have contact with her. And all that's happened is that the British authorities themselves have released a statement in very bureaucratic English, old-school civil service authorities type language that they claim to have been released by Yulia, that actually asked for her to be left alone. And so it seems strange that in these circumstances, that certainly, I made this point this afternoon, I know probably other people have made it as well, that if Yulia Skripal's story was going to support, if her version of events would support the British government's case in this and the many claims the British government have made, you would expect, wouldn't you, that the British government would make sure that Yulia Skripal would be on the front page of every newspaper and in the headlines telling her story about what happened. And yet it's been kept absolutely quiet and nobody's asking questions. What is going on here? You've got a situation where two people have effectively been disappeared by the authorities. Now, maybe that the authorities are telling the truth, but what's astonishing is that nobody is actually in the media, the mainstream media at least, actually questioning this and asking why it is that nobody from the media, for example, has been able to speak to these people. It wouldn't compromise their security if they did.
Well, I don't know what happened in Salisbury, but I do know that it isn't what the British government told us it was, because all the circumstantial evidence is now a mountain that the story we were told, and though we were told actually several different stories, none of those stories can be true. And I think sneaking Mr. Skripal out of hospital today, when it was bound to be buried in royal news, is final confirmation of that. The disappearance of Yulia, as you've just said, is another significant reason. The inherent implausibility of the gel, which we were told by the OPCW was 100 grams, in other words, 1.5 duck's eggs worth of gel perched on a door handle, only to be told the next day that, oh no, they didn't mean grams, they meant milligrams. The fact that the couple are now out and apparently healthy, left hospital, the difference between Yulia's tone in the telephone call that we've heard and her written statement, which a police officer read out from her just a couple of days later, all of the mountain of circumstantial evidence leads me ineluctably to conclude that the state is lying. Now, states lie all the time. What is, as you've just said, infinitely less forgivable is that a free press, a free media, isn't even asking the state to explain itself.